Am I the a-hole for excluding and telling off a disabled kid? This happened ages ago, but I was recently reminded of it by my mother, who still believes I was the asshole in the situation. I'll explain things how I remember them, all names changed for privacy, of course. When I was in my first year of middle school, my friend group and I liked to sit at a certain table during the lunch period, and we never minded having other kids join in with us. A lot of us shared the same classes, so we knew each other well and shared a lot of the same interests like certain shows and games and the like. At some point, there were a couple of kids who asked if they could sit with us. They were about 2 grades above us. Since our school went up to high school at the time, I thought the older one was a high schooler. I only remember that the older one, Barney, had a physical disability that affected the way he walked and prevented him from being able to hold many things with his hands. He was in a special ed class with his friend Carl. Everything was fine at first, but I think it was within the first week that something didn't sit right. We learned that Barney was actually older than we first thought. He was an actual old enough to drive teenager, which made it that much weirder to witness when he'd make uncomfortable and pushy comments with my friend Emma. As pre-teens, we didn't know how to respond to his innuendos, the ones that we could understand, and some of his jokes, but they made us all uncomfortable. Barney also brought the mood down a lot by complaining about his home life, or would often try to steer the conversation to things that only he was interested in. If we took to our own conversations, he'd interrupt and talk over us. Something that irked me a lot was how often he would say we were his only friends because no one else in his grade liked him because of his disability. Granted, there was probably some truth to this. I lived in a conservative town, and it was not a progressive time as is. But the people he named didn't sound anything like how he described. I didn't want to dismiss what he said because I knew even then that people treat disabled people like shit. But he'd sometimes call these people assholes, bitches, or words we didn't even know existed and didn't really elaborate. I told my mother about this when it happened, and she said to either be honest and explain our feelings, or to sit someplace else, though that wasn't possible in our lunchroom, and it was hard to explain things to him because we didn't want to chance offending him. I still did at times, mostly to complain about what became uncomfortable topics like marriage, and I think he started to dislike me then. He'd avoid talking to me unless it was to ask about Emma. After our holiday break, he pulled me aside and asked me if I thought he had a chance with her. I knew her answer. She told me she was always creeped out by the way he'd shower her with compliments about how she looked, and he'd often try to sit way too close to her to the point that she could actually feel his breath on her skin. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, but she was embarrassed by how often he put her on the spot and tried getting us to agree or back him up. I told him that we were too young to date and that she had told me she didn't want to have a boyfriend then. Plus, our parents wouldn't want us dating anyone, let alone a high schooler. He, of course, ignored me and made a point of confessing in front of everyone at our table come Valentine's Day. She did her best to let him down easy, though he clearly didn't like her answer. Because when she stopped talking, he asked, "Is it because of my disability?" She, of course, said no. She just didn't share the same feelings for him. But she didn't know how to explain that he made her super uncomfortable. He then said he thought we were all his friends, and he kept asking through the whole lunch period why she wouldn't want to go out with him, and she just couldn't give an answer. I think she went home early that day. Shortly after that, we all explained that we didn't want to sit with him if he wasn't going to change the behavior we'd confronted him about. I can't remember his response, but I remember he stopped sitting with us, and we got some dirty looks from some other kids and teachers, so he might have said something to them. Through the rest of that semester and into the next school year, he cycled through different tables of kids. It was often groups of girls. He sat with my sister and her friends for a few months, and I realized that my sister's friend Abby shared a lot of characteristics that he would often compliment my friend about when he sat with us. And just like with Emma, she also couldn't find it in herself to say anything or be direct with him. And once again, he was creeping her and everyone else at the table out in his approach. We'd told teachers a few times by this point, but it was always, just sit somewhere else, or don't be mean, be nice. During an assembly, he tried sitting behind Emma, or maybe Abby, instead of with the other students in his grade. He was hard to miss. He was the only kid with facial hair, and leaned over the aisle to try getting her attention and whisper her name. Carl was trying to get him to sit with their peers, especially when teachers stepped over. But Barney insisted that they were his friends and that they said he could sit behind them. Everyone in the school was looking at them for all the fuss he made about it. I didn't see everything he did, but Emma explained to me that he'd follow and call out to her in the halls, said a lot of innuendos, and kept inserting himself in her conversations. Emma cried when she talked in private about it. She felt like she couldn't get away from him, so I decided I wouldn't watch it happen anymore. While we were in the auditorium one morning, he tried to sit with us since we were all sitting together. He kept asking Abby several questions, and she didn't respond or make eye contact. He spoke louder and asked her why she hates him all of a sudden. I turned to him and said, "Barney, can you sit with someone else? She doesn't want to talk right now, and you're making her and everyone else uncomfortable." He scowled and said he wasn't talking to me, he was trying to talk to Abby, and turned to her asking why she wouldn't say anything to me. At that point, Abby must have snapped because she said, "I don't want you to talk to me." He stepped away from the table crying. A teacher came up to us and lectured us about being inclusive and said we should apologize to him, but none of us moved or gave her a response. So she promised we'd be disciplined and went after him herself. Nothing came of it. Our peers looked at me and Abby with a new disgust when they overheard. A lot of people avoided me for weeks. I went home and told my mom about it, and she told me that it wasn't my place to speak for anyone. How was I supposed to know how Abby felt if she didn't say anything? She said I was a bully for excluding someone over something they couldn't help. Even when my sister explained her side, she doubled down and said that a lot of people with disabilities struggle socially, and it can be hard for them to pick up on social cues, but that's no reason to treat them like I had. She said that he might not have understood what he did wrong. It could have all been a misunderstanding on our behalf, and that we needed to apologize. I already felt a lot of guilt for it, but I never apologized. I barely saw him, and he avoided me like the plague even before I said anything. When we were freshmen, Emma had hit her limit when he tried sitting with us again. She said she doesn't want to be friends and she'll never want to date him. I don't think I ever saw him again after she did this. I don't know what happened to him, though I should say that when I was a senior, I learned by chance that he'd been pulled into the principal's office during our freshman year due to multiple reports from other girls across different grade levels. So chances are he might have had to attend a different school. Recently, my mother told me she's proud of how far I've come as a person, because I mentioned a coworker's wheelchair as part of an anecdote. And thinking on all this with hindsight, I still can't help but wonder if I was in the wrong. I'm not sure anymore. I still believe that a person who is conscious of their decisions and choices shouldn't get a get-out-of-jail-free card because they're physically disabled. Of course, I understood then, as I understand now, that he had to have had unique challenges. I could never know, and I imagine there are factors like depression and social isolation involved that affected Barney's behavior, but I just feel that if someone's going to interact with the public and people as a whole, they should be mindful of boundaries, or at least be able to handle when someone confronts them about that. I don't think we should have been made to feel obligated to stay friends with this kid when he harassed us, but maybe I was being an unfair, judgmental asshole to him the whole time he knew us, and he was right to dislike me. Maybe he really couldn't help his behavior, and I was being overly defensive of my friend. I must admit I was ignorant to a lot of stuff at the time as is, and I know I'm still ignorant to a lot of this stuff, so you tell me, Reddit. Was I the asshole here? Am I still the asshole for thinking I was in the right?